morning. Welcome to Full Circle with Tessa Dooms. I'm Tessa Dooms, and this morning we're going to have a conversation, as we always do, about the state of the country, the state of South Africa, the state of politics in this country, and the ways in which we can build a different South Africa, a better South Africa. As always, this is a partnership between the Insights Show and the Rivonia Circle. And this morning is a very special morning for me because I get to introduce you to more members of the Rivonia Circle team. And our topic today is really born out of the questions that brought the Rivonia Circle team together, and I've got two of the co-founders of Rivonia Circle and directors of the Rivonia Circle who will be joining me this morning. Lukhona Mnguni, who we'll start off with, and then later on we'll also be speaking to Lorato Tshenkeng, who's going to really just give us context as to why we do the kinds of work that we do, why it's important for us as a country to talk about politics, to think about politics, and to try and find ways that all of us can be a part of the journey that is South Africa 2.0, a different, better South Africa. So as we get started today, I get to introduce you to one of my good friends, but shame, today he's not here as my friend. Today he's here as a serious individual. He's here as a serious human. Mr. Lukhona Mnguni. And so, Lukhona, welcome to Full Circle.
Thank you. At last, at last I make my way here. Thank you. And yeah, you guys are doing fantastic conversations here.
Very glad. So, so this morning we're going to be talking about new politics. And this is a topic that at the Rivonia Circle we talk about a lot. And we also want to talk about the concept of South Africa 2.0. And I want us to unpack that a little bit, because I think that we can say we want a different kind of country and a different kind of future, but very many people are asking the question, how? And we've heard that a lot, people saying, okay, cool, you're saying we're going to do things differently, you're saying that we must all get up and act differently, but the big question is how. So I want us to address that this morning. But before we do that, I thought, let's start at the beginning of this Rivonia Circle journey. And you were there on day one of Rivonia Circle. I was not. Some people don't know that. They don't realize you were there in the beginning. But maybe just talk to us about Rivonia Circle and how this idea of Rivonia Circle came to be.
Well, I think Rivonia Circle is an outcome of many conversations that have been happening over the last 12 years, because the co-founders of Rivonia Circle are people who had known each other for some time, at least in the last decade, jointly. And there's always been that sense of, wanting to move out of the space of lamentation to some degree of solution. So Songezo Zibi had been, across the corporate sector, but spent some time quite front-facing when he was Business Day editor, and Lukhona Mnguni, for example, now the late, a very good friend of mine, a very good friend to Lorato, a very good friend to Songezo, probably the most defining common denominator across the four people. And he had spent his own life on radio with Umhlobo Wenene. He had spent his life as a communication specialist, spent some time at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Lorato Tshenkeng himself had, as far back in 2008 towards 2009, been part of people who started an online platform that was really about conversations about our democracy. So these are really committed and serious individuals about the state of South African life. I migrated across various spheres in the public discourse arena, trying to agitate for the right thing to be done and critique where the state was going wrong. But I think we just got to a point where we're tired of doing the critiquing part of it. And we wanted an avenue that would afford us an opportunity to actually begin different conversations with society. I think we came to a conclusion that having conversations with the people who are lawmakers, decision makers, and power brokers in society is not resulting into anything beneficial. And so it was time to go back to, back to our roots, where we come from, the communities, and have conversations with communities, understand what people are looking for in the life of our political landscape. What is it that pisses them off about our politics, and what is it that they are willing to do to turn around? Because at the end of the day, democracy is really vested in the people and not necessarily the lawmakers themselves.
So is this another think tank, another place for, you know, the intellectuals of society to gather around the table and pontificate? Or what's the vision for this in terms of the outcomes? Because some people have said, well, you know, people pontificate all the time, and when you've been in the space where you are doing analysis and you're doing critique, you know, that's all you have the capacity to do. Is this a limiting space in that sense, or how did you conceive of the space as you created it?
Well, because sometimes you have to use lexicon that is familiar for people, and you do not overly reinvent the wheel. I think we conceived of the Rivonia Circle as a political think tank. We did a survey across the world of a number of jurisdictions where such political think tanks exist, in your Germanys, in your United States of America. And these think tanks really serve a political intention to inform society of where we are and what the desirable destination is and how you would possibly get there. What much of civil society has done where politics is concerned is to lobby and to advocate to an existing government, and they've never really done so with intention to question the legitimacy of the government or to pronounce on the legitimacy of the government, unless they're really angry at a particular point. But the modus operandi has always been to advocate to the government of the day, lobby the government of the day to do the right thing. And I think that's the first, disruptive part of the Rivonia Circle's existence, is that we don't seek to advocate, we don't seek to lobby the current government to do anything. We have been very clear that we are in the crisis at which we find ourselves as a country because of this particular government, and their time has come up, and the citizens must decide how best to transition away from being governed or misgoverned the way that they have been for the last while. And then we have also extended and said, the manner in which politics is done in South Africa is such that it preserves the power of the political parties and disempowers the voter and the citizen, because some citizens don't vote, and that's because they've made a political choice not to vote. None of the existing parties inspire them, and we are beginning to see by people opting out in terms of the voting process, and the voter turnout is becoming poorer and poorer, as we saw with the recent local government elections in November 2021. That's what makes the Rivonia Circle different, which is what also attracts very established NGOs and think tanks to the Rivonia Circle, because they can see the political intent behind the work that the Rivonia Circle does, and the space in which we are able to exist, not only in the ivory towers of intellectualization and intellectual or philosophical theoretical work, but the ability we have to actually be in communities through programmatic work such as the democracy builder, the political theater, the convenings that we do, whether we do those convenings with other stakeholders, as we recently did with electoral reforms in Ndaba last week Friday, or town hall conversations that we hold as the Rivonia Circle in different parts of the country. It's quite clear that our intentions are to help people formulate solutions about their political future without being concerned about seeking permission from existing political players, because we've always felt that it's the existing political players who must do something. But we're quite clear, because of our research, our focus groups, our democracy builders and other things, and I think the hypothesis to which the Rivonia Circle was founded, to say society needs to look beyond the current political parties. Then the question becomes, how do you do that? Well, the people will answer that for themselves. What the Rivonia Circle will always provide is a convening space for people to be politically free to express themselves. And as you know, we've had in our meetings, and there's not an anti-parties kind of initiative, but the parties themselves know that they are messing up. And we've had people from a variety of political parties participating in our work, and they speak quite frankly and brutally honest in ways that they probably wouldn't in other spaces. And that's because the Rivonia Circle is a genuine space for reflecting on the state of our politics. And it may just well be that in 10 years' time, the Rivonia Circle will preoccupy itself with other questions about the state of the state in South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, the first week that we launched Rivonia Circle, we didn't know we were launching that week.
Yeah, of course.
I remember on Twitter we had a number of people, some with good intent and honest intent of just understanding, and some with less good intentions, saying, you guys, this is a political organization. Why don't you just come out and say, you're a political organization? So last week you wrote a piece, and you said, yes, we are out here, we are a political organization. But maybe we should talk about what it means to be a political organization that's not contesting an election. People in this country have become very wary of politics, and we've seen it in our work. When we go to a community and you say the word politics, people's backs up against the wall, all sorts of things. What do we mean when we say we're a political party or political organization if we are saying we're not a political party as the Rivonia Circle? What does that mean?
Well, we probably have to first understand what we mean by politics. Politics, in its very basic formulation, being the contestation of power in society. And this contestation of power extends to a wide range of issues. Who has voice in society? What are the platforms that give rise or ability to that voice? What are the living conditions of people? When we talk about class stratification of our society, we are inherently talking about how political power is distributed. Some, like my good Prof. Paulo Sizulu at UKZN would say, politics is the struggle for the distribution of finite resources in society. Now, this is everything that we do is inherently political, but we've got to then decide at a particular era what political role we wish to play in the life of our country. So people who run soup kitchens, for example, in their communities, exist to respond to a political failure that has led to food insecurity and hunger and all of these things in their society. Now, you may just perceive it as a soup kitchen that has nothing to do with politics, but the reality of it is that it's highly politicized work. People who have to go on a drive to buy school children shoes are engaged in political work, because had the politics not failed so much, perhaps our poverty levels would not be so terrible, and therefore there wouldn't be a need to do just the bare minimum and the basics. So when we say Rivonia Circle is a political think tank, we say it overtly engages actively in politicized work about helping the country to have a platform that is sincere and very open about its intentions, to disrupt the status quo, but also to bring people together to really imagine what a new political culture should look like in South Africa. Now, other organizations have done this differently. For example, our partners in the electoral reforms work, My Vote Counts, a few years back launched what they call an intra-party democracy initiative. So where they gauge the state of internal democracy in political parties. Because you've got to answer the question, if a political party is inherently undemocratic in how it is run, what are the chances that it will democratically run the state were it to be given power? Now, that's political work by a civil society organization, but we've gone a step further to say inherently these political parties are undemocratic. They have a culture of democratic centralism. They are all fashioned around the political culture of the African National Congress in terms of how they imagine what a political party is, that it must have branches and that it must have people who represent others to go and elect their leadership and so on. These are all archaic things and forms of existence. And therefore, the Rivonia Circle is there for the taking. Anybody who wants to have a conversation about a new political culture can tap into our work and see how they use our insights to refine, remodel, re-engineer their own political parties. So even the EFF can come to the Rivonia Circle, the DA can come to the Rivonia Circle and listen to what are these new forms of political culture. And people who are still having an interest of forming their own political parties can utilize the Rivonia Circle in that way. So that's what we mean when we say the Rivonia Circle is a political organization, or at least a political think tank that exists in a sort of civil society space in the formulation of our imagination as a country. But what is quite clear to us is that people feel they are not part of the conversation about South Africa. And they are alienated from many conversations, whether they are pitched, because people have their own interests that they are pushing, whether this would be your business, organized labor, organized business, whether it would be political parties themselves or other social movements. But the Rivonia Circle becomes that convening space that is quite broad, anchored, of course, on certain values such as social democratic values.
Yeah, and we're going to get to some of the things that make Rivonia Circles work particularly, I think, progressive and different in the ways that we hope it is. But I just wanted to tap into that question of a political culture. You said the word political culture, and I think it's a new word that we are introducing really into the South African imagination. So when we talk about a political culture, are we just talking about a new party or new forms of contesting electoral power? What is wrong with the South African political culture as it stands right now? And what do we mean by the need for a new political culture?
Well, you are looking at the entire political ecosystem. And you want to ask the question, what is the general ethos that runs our political system? So this is about both political parties, how they behave. It's also about our electoral system and how we vote people into power. And then it's also about what happens once those people are in power and how are they held accountable and so on. Does the architecture permit for robust engagement between those who govern and those who are governed? Does it permit for serious accountability of those who are in office? And therefore, when you talk about political culture, you are saying what has gone right and what has gone wrong with the political ecosystem. And the political ecosystem is governed by an ethos where political parties have effectively hijacked democracy from citizens. And they have hijacked democracy from citizens in multiple ways. Things are a little different in local government, but we can use that as an interesting model. They're a little different in that people are able to vote directly for their councillors from their communities, and then the parties are able to fill some gaps with their proportional representation lists and so on. But there hasn't been a mechanism, even for the constituency-based ward councillors, to give more powers to the very ward that elected a councillor and not necessarily to the political party. And as a result, and I mean this is how, for example, the Malutia Pufong 16 group was formed, the MAP 16 that then contested elections last year, and now they are leading a coalition government. The ANC there was insistent that the councillors in council could not take a decision to vote against a mayor without the approval of the ANC. Now get this. The ANC is a body outside of council. Councillors are members of council, and they are quite clear about what they are observing in the business of council and the potential corruption. The councillors
themselves.
Yeah, the councillors themselves. Forget which party they come from for a minute. They are quite clear that there's corruption happening here, and the mayor might be at the heart of facilitating this corruption. And therefore, what should we do? Let us remove the mayor. He's our comrade, but he's corrupt. So let us remove the mayor because we've got the ability in law to do that. But the party, unhappy about that decision, refuses for the mayor to go and rather sacrifices 16 of its councillors. by harassing them with disciplinary threats to suspend and expel them from the organization, And once you are expelled from the organization, you lose your seat in council, right? So then MEP 16 is born. And this issue has paralyzed some municipalities. I mean, before the 2016 elections at local government, if you went to a municipality like Mbashe, for example, councillors had to be in court for time and time again, trying to litigate against their own party to say, we were trying to do the right thing in council, but the party is now firing us. And of course, those get overturned, but then again, the party still finds a way to get rid of those people. So what has gone wrong with the political culture is that political parties have too much power. And the unfortunate part about that is that it blurs the distinction between party and state, simply because the party almost behaves as if it is in office, not the individuals that are sent to office. And even when the individuals are doing the right thing and the party is against that, maybe because you are closing a tap that is a patronage resource for the party. And this is not just about the ANC. We've seen the DA firing councillors who don't vote as per the party line.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the city of Joburg thing play out, where Action SA has definitely said to a councillor, you know, we're removing you. And I'm not sure that they have evidence.
They don't.
That
It's speculative. It's speculative. They're saying we are left with no choice. If you read their statement closely, we are left with no choice to believe that your absence was part of the inducements by others. But they don't have evidence that there was inducement. They don't have, I mean, okay, the councillor might not be assisting themselves by not, you know, writing reasons as to why they should not be suspended and so on. But you may also imagine that in a new party, this might be somebody who's new to politics. They have a cultural shock as to, okay, why am I just being automatically thought of in the wrong ways?
Yeah.
And some people really do feel at times where they believe they are unfairly dealt with, they have no reason to give credibility to that process by way of engaging with it and making submissions and representation. So we don't really know what is happening. Then it would be really interesting to speak to that councillor and see how they feel prejudiced or not by the process that Action SA has rolled out against them. But again, therein lies the problem. The party has too much power because, and I'm sure it's feelings of a few that are then amplified into a party position, and you are not even given a process. I mean, at the highest, at the Senate level, your membership is cancelled. But it also shows you the teething problems of a new political entity, because ordinarily at first that matter would be handled at maybe a much more local, regional level. It also shows you just probably how badly structured Action SA is. I mean, that would be a matter of, for the Gauteng provincial leadership, probably. I mean, I can't imagine a national just getting immediately involved in a matter of a council. But the stakes are high, right? The stakes are high. If this coalition government doesn't work out, there is a serious threat that the councillors who are now being seen, you know, having media engagement as MMCs, you know, you are building their public profiles, you are building their connection with citizens. If that fails, and now you are just reduced to being opposition in council, then you don't have that leverage of being in office, which even if you don't necessarily are corrupt and you are using, you know, you are using your position to channel resources to your party members and your party associates and so on, but the mere fact of being in office is enough for you to leverage on for political reasons.
Right.
Now, if that crisis pertains the way that we saw the speaker leave, and then there is a new mayor in the city of Joburg and appoints entirely new MMCs, that sort of wipes out the public, the public presence of certain councillors, and that is not good, because ahead of 2024, you want to build the public profiles of as many leaders in an organization as possible.
So you're talking about the centrality of the political party and its power and its ability to then make decisions. Where is the power of the voter at this point, right? So I remember just before the local government elections last year, being in a community in Diepsloot, and somebody making a very important point and asking, why should I vote? Will my vote allow me, if this person who I vote for doesn't do the right thing, to recall the person? And I remember standing there thinking, I don't know the answer to this question, mate.
Well,
And I actually am not sure that once you give your vote to this person, what level of power you have as the citizen. So you're pointing out that the political party continues to have power and has more power than the voter or the citizen does on a continuous basis, yeah?
well, of course, I've argued this with friends and colleagues a lot over the last years, and I've said my biggest problem with the South African Constitution is that it has a very poor architecture of accountability and does not accrue enough powers to the citizen to hold those who are in power accountable. The only time a minister is obliged to give as honest a response as possible is when parliamentarians submit written questions.
Well, unless your name is Cyril Ramaphosa and this is Parliament.
Well, of course. I mean, and of course, this is why I have a better preference for written questions than the whole oral submission things, because people then use the platform to evade, and then you've got points of order, and the whole thing detracts really from credibility. But there's no avenue for citizens to write to ministers and ask questions. You have to find a parliamentarian who might have appetite for the question that you have. And at times, parliamentarians, both from the governing party and the opposition party, just don't have appetite for some questions because they just think, well, you know what? I am opposed to the government, but I don't really want to get on their bad side in the way that you want me to with this question, right? Just yesterday, I was reading up on how do you submit a petition to the National Assembly for noting, and you need the petition to, if you are submitting to the National Assembly, to be supported by a member of parliament. Now, this is exactly why we need electoral reforms, because it might be easier for me to find a member of parliament if actually there is a member of parliament that represents my constituents,
Yeah.
because I possibly know that person. Now, they say you can go to the nearest constituency office and submit this thing. But what if the member of parliament whose constituency office is in my constituency doesn't like what I'm talking about? Because they actually don't even come from this constituency. Because the current problem that you have, you vote for whatever party deploys, and then retrospectively they deploy and create constituencies.
Right.
So you find that the person who's the member of the constituency in my neighborhood does not even come from the province where my neighborhood is. And there are a lot of barriers, context understanding, language, and so on. So the point I'm making is that there isn't enough of an architecture that empowers citizens to hold all elected representatives from local right up to national accountable. And therefore, yes, the question is very simple to that person. There's no mechanism for the voter to recall a councillor. And this is why in the current electoral reforms, we talk about a recall clause, the possibility at midterm, after 2.5 years, after 2 years in office, the constituency must have an ability to say, if X% of registered voters sign a petition against the public representative, then that constituency must go into a by-election. And I think that's where we need to get to with wards as well and so on. Now, people will then say this is administratively cumbersome. Unfortunately, democracy must be administratively cumbersome in order to make sure that all the touch points that are available are actually dealt with. Because if we don't do that, if we don't empower citizens, you are going to run a risk of those in office feeling that they are the power. In some places, this is called a confidence vote. You go, citizens can trigger a vote on a sitting governor, for example, in the US and in some of the states, to say, do we still have confidence? And then the governor wins or loses the confidence vote. And if they lose the confidence vote, then we must go to an election. There aren't enough mechanisms in South Africa for citizens to do their accountability work. Lastly, where there has been great imagination for citizens to be involved is in municipalities. So you create what committees, you say that citizens can do a performance review of the municipality, but the power to execute that accountability is vested with the municipality.
Right.
So if the municipality doesn't invest in formulating the guidelines on how their ward committees operate, then those ward committees will be existent only in paper. If the municipality does not initiate road shows to communities, then the residents have no ability to trigger that to get into effect. And as we review local government, we need to really find a way to balance, vest some of the processes with the citizens themselves, remove councillors as chairpersons of the ward committees, because hilarious stuff if you go around the country and you talk to ward committees. They say if the councillor believes that in the ward committee there's somebody who's prominent enough and is a threat to them,
who's a dissonant,
the councillor stops convening ward committee meetings to deprive that person of information and understanding of how council works, because they see that as competition. So we really don't have that. And that's what we mean at the Rivonia Circle when we talk about a new political culture. How do you undo the architecture? Because people sometimes think this is a dislike for personalities. It's really about a system analysis, that the system has disempowered the voter and the citizen.
Thanks for that. So we have reached a halfway mark on Full Circle this morning. We're talking about the new politics and the new kinds of political culture we think can create South Africa 2.0 and the Rivonia Circle and the role that we would like to play. So I'm talking to my colleagues this morning. I'm talking to my friends, my brothers. And we've been joined by one. So Lorato has joined us. And Lorato, I wanted to bring you straight in on the basis of this question of increasing the power of citizens, of voters, of people, and maybe to talk a little bit about the Democracy Builder. It was a process that you and I kicked off a few months ago in Venda. What does it mean when we talk about the power to act and empowering people? Why are we fixated on that? And maybe just to explain to people what the Democracy Builder is in your estimation and how it encourages people to act.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tess. And Lukhona, always exciting to be in spaces with you. So, interestingly, you know, I think I segue, you know, at the right time when Lukhona talks about the importance of accountability as far as citizens are concerned, right? And maybe let me start with an anecdote. So, the city of Tshwane starts a, you know, supposed to be useful campaign. Tshwane team, right, where they were cutting off ratepayers who were not paying their services. And of course, in all of that, I was concerned that, so have we investigated as citizens, one, whether, you know, there was a lapse in execution of their duties, particularly from both the politicians who sit in council, but also the bureaucrats who are supposed to be collecting the monies. And upon investigation, I then realized a number of things. One was that, you know, there were a number of strategies that were in place that they did not execute, whether it was the debt management, debt collection strategies that were in place that were not being implemented. And my biggest question, therefore, was, so what is the responsibility of council in holding the bureaucrats? You know, they have performance contracts. So if you have somebody who's not collecting money for the while, and then they are almost about to put the city in a financial crisis, right? And then the next thing that I then observed was the issue around the access to information, right? Of course, when, you know, there are a number of instruments that we can use as citizens to have access to information. But I realized that while there is an act that allows us as citizens to access information, in fact, the cities or municipalities, as it were, they have a responsibility of customizing that to their own locality. And it was the case in City of Tshwane, where when you read the act as it is, it gives the impression that you can actually have access to all information from the council and from the city. You then realize when you go deeper into this document that, in fact, there are certain information that you may not be allowed to access, right? And that, for me, you know, set an intrigue in the sense that how much do we as citizens go into finding out some of this information? But secondly, how much of it is actually being made accessible? Because sometimes, as part of open government, the importance for me is how much of proactive communication is happening there to ensure that I don't always have to be investigating for me to find out this information. But government in turn has a responsibility to make the information accessible, but also remind me all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the points that we've made about new politics. that, civics is important. It's a new word that I've also just started using a lot more often, that a new political culture and new politics is also about learning about the state, knowing what our rights are, knowing what's available to us, and not just having the state utilize us. I was just looking at one of the comments coming in from Josiah saying that, our politics is about instrumentalizing people, but not necessarily drawing people in and empowering everybody to know how they can engage, what their rights are, what they have access to, or what we should be fighting to have more access to.
Absolutely, and that's where now the democracy builder becomes very, very instrumental, right? So of course, in February we were in Venda with our first democracy builder, and what the democracy builder really is, it's an important session to get people who are already doing things in their own communities. With the first one in Venda, we had close to about 40 people, different ages, all genders. And interestingly, because all of them are running one thing or the other, from somebody who runs a youth sexual health program to the leader of the group, or the coordinator rather of the group, who runs a maths tutorial sessions in Venda. Of course, so it is broken down into a number of sessions, right? The first one is get people to talk about concepts that ordinarily, they sound like big words, but because we don't often ask people, or at least we don't make time to listen to what people's experience and interpretation of these words. And that's the first part of the session, where we look at words such as democracy, government, and governance, and we know there's a conflation often between those two. Advocacy and activism, again, a little bit of a conflation there. For instance, Lukhona was emphasizing the issue of the Rivonia Circle is not an advocacy organization, and it's important that as you clear out your purpose, or even as you do or as part of your mission, you have a sense of understanding of these key concepts. Of course, then we then move from there, where we now localize the conversation, where we make it personal, to say, if there were 3 issues that you could resolve in your community, what are those 3 issues? So they have cue cards where they write those 3 issues. Of course, always encourage them never to write theses, because people are always tempted, because South Africans know how to express themselves. Yeah. And out of those, then we create some sort of what we call a bar graph. And in that bar graph, it's really a visual representation of what are the most, or what are the issues that resonate with a lot of people. And fortunately, because they don't copy one another, then the exercise thereafter is about people recognizing, even some of them are even shocked that I thought that the biggest problem here was crime, and somebody else says, it's something else. Another would be thinking that, it's obvious that it's unemployment, and then they realize that it's something completely different, right? So then there's almost people who live in the same community starting to have some sort of a realization that while I may have a particular experience about an issue, but I'm actually recognizing that there are similarities, but also there are differences. The importance then becomes on the next session, where they come together as a group to say, take one of the most call it resonant issue, and let's come together and think about the South Africa we want to live in. And every time it starts as an apprehensive exercise. And apprehensive not because people are not imagining the South Africa, right? But I guess because of the hopelessness, because of the governance system, because of the rot. And so there's some sort of slowness in picking up. But immediately you come using an example of, and we use this example of, comparing an Alcatel that I used back in my first smartphone versus the latest one that I have, right? Where it's about fit for purpose. And people start now really imagining what this fit for purpose is about, and they see what is possible, so they remove, and it's that new culture of politics where we say, don't think about a South Africa with the current players, don't think about the incumbents, because if you do that, you already create limitations. And once they remove the limitations, then they recognize that, listen, indeed, although it may sound like a cliche, but the sky is the limit. But also, we have a role and responsibility in all of this, because now they connect the work that they do on a regular basis in their own projects to this South Africa that they see, to what others are doing, and to really recognizing that it's we're actually a bigger community that if we are to come together and do all of this, we are likely to change things not only for our communities, but from a political level, at both at a micro or local government level, and even at a national or provincial and national.
I mean, my favorite thing about the Democracy Builder by far is the fact that projects come out of these things. Every convening we've had, and we've had now, I think, about 12 or 13 Democracy Builders in 6 provinces, and we are now over the 30 project mark officially. Where there are 30 projects that are community-driven in this country that are happening, and the range has been amazing. So we've got our first pig farm that is starting in Philippi, so in Kailicha. We've got a chicken farm. We've got a safety app. We've got a clinic committee that's come out of this. Yeah. There's such a wide range of things that people are willing to do and using their own power to enact this kind of politics, you know. Well, how do I change my society and what is my role? And that's the kind of politics we've been hoping to build. And I think it's in line with something that Tefu on the comments is speaking about. And this is something I've been thinking about, and I want to hear your views on this, Lukhona. But he's saying during apartheid, we had street committees. We had actually communities organizing themselves. And you know, do we want to go back to an era, I hope not back to apartheid itself, but do we want to go back to an era where communities take their agency? And I was speaking to Reverend Frank Chikane a few weeks ago, and he makes the point that at the point of democracy, it seems that we gave our agency as communities, we gave our power as communities, we gave our power even as civil society organizations to the political establishment, to government, and then we sat back and we thought, well, the work is done. Is this a time and a moment and an opportunity for us to reclaim that sense that communities have the answers, they can organize for themselves, and they can take us forward?
You know, I think in every time in the existence of a society, there always has to be a way of finding spaces of community. You can't govern a society without it being in spaces of community, because what it does is create what, I mean, the politicians actually know the problems, but they just have no mechanisms to address them. For the longest time, if you listen to the likes of Zwelinzima Mavavi and others in COSATU and the SACP, they would speak about the social distance between the leaders and society. And of course, social distance is a significant risk in any society, because if it becomes vast enough, it could lead to social chaos, as we saw with the July unrest in 2021, where people have no place or contact of authority or contact of leadership, and then they lead themselves. What Ross Kahn calls the leaderless revolution, and the risks of it, when people are loosely organized and there's no leadership and so on. Inherently, the design of a representative democracy leads to society or communities having to give up some power to the representatives. And this is where now the social contract theorists would differ. John Locke would believe that when the representatives no longer adhere to the prescripts of the social contract, then framed around property rights and the protection thereof and so on, the citizens have a reason to revolt against that representative authority. Thomas Hobbes takes a different view and calls the person elected by the citizens to be the enforcer of the social contract almost like a supreme ruler or sovereign ruler, the sovereign ruler. And he says, you've made your choice, stick with it. If they mess up, it's your problem. You made the problem, but you can't just you can't go around and be mopping around and saying this person is not doing their work and so on. But if you reconcile these two positions, it's quite clear that communities will always give up their power. But the question really is, how do we build spaces of community in a democracy to ensure that communities have serious negotiating power with those who are in office. But I think what is currently the problem now is that there's no negotiating power between those who are in office and the citizens. In actual fact, the government is not scared of the citizens, does not feel that it must respect the citizens, it does not feel that it must respect the offices the citizens have put them in. It does not believe that it must have good stewardship over the resources and other powers and authority that accrues to them. Now, 1994 was a serious demobilization moment of the citizens. And you know what? Sometimes I am very critical of it. At times I'm understanding of it. I'm understanding in the sense that, I mean, communities, particularly black communities, had been engaged in struggle against the system for centuries. And here was a moment to literally just take a breather and say, whew, we've finally made a significant transition. We've secured a massive victory, and maybe it's time for us to just breathe and gain our lives back. I often say the greatest marker of success in the democratic era for me would be the ability for people to govern so well that activists gain back 50% of their time. Because activists have given up their families, they've given up their lives. In actual fact, to an extent, some risk their lives, some lose their lives. If you look at Abahlali baseMjondolo being killed, if you look at land activists in KwaZulu-Natal being killed, and so on. So for me, it's holding two things in tension. You do want a government that works and works well so that people can live their lives and be more creative, be more economically active. Because I don't think you can be creative when you are burdened by just always fighting for justice in one form or the other. Your creative abilities are stunted by just the burden of having to fight the system. And I do think that we need to do both things. So it might not be street committees. We're in 2022. There are many streets. There are Twitter streets. There are Facebook streets, you know. So the idea of street committees has to be innovative and inventive within the times in which we live. But what we are seeing with the Rivonia Circle work is that actually people do still want to belong to some community, and that's why when you do a democracy builder in Khayelitsha, they ask you, when can we meet the guys you did a democracy builder with in Gauteng, because they actually feel there is an emerging community of democracy builders, of people who are patriotic and concerned about the country. Maybe it's those kind of spaces that we really need to galvanize and make sure that they come into existence.
Yeah, Calvin on the comment line was also saying that there are other communities of people that need to be re-engaged, academics, scientists, you know. How do we start to conceive of community outside of just the geographic community? Because I know in the civil society space, a lot of our work and our effort over the last few years has been about the most marginal geographic communities, rural areas, townships. But we also need to reimagine community and who, you know, gets engaged in politics. So is there space for engaging academics and engaging them differently? I mean, we talk about the role of the public intellectual. Should we be talking to, you know, academics and saying, it's very nice that you wrote that paper on Hobbes. We like it. What are we going to do now? Yeah. Should we be talking to scientists? And by this, I mean even natural scientists. You know, there's somebody working on water projects. How do we get everybody to be a community that is able to act and has the power to act?
Yeah. So Tessa, and there's an example that Tessa uses in the Democracy Builder, and I think it's important for me to mention this. So how she brings up the issue on power to act, right? She walks into a lecture hall, you know, full of many young students, and
I was a lecturer, by the way.
She was a lecturer, right? And one of the students decides to walk in with a dumpy in their hand, right? Tessa, as the authority, has two options. One, you know, to exercise the power and authority to chuck this guy out, but also, you know, allow the dude in. Tessa, in her account, she allows the dude in, and of course leaves the class, you know, in somewhat confused, because here are people who are imagining that this is a learning space, that there's some decorum that is expected. But the lesson there is really around, you know, one, herself exercising the power to act, right? And in this case, allowing for him to access learning, right? But also, these people who are in the room who could have done the same, but they chose to use their power to act in that way. And this example I used, Tessa, precisely to the question that you raise around. So with many of these micro communities, right, there's always a central thing that almost holds us together. And in this case, as Lukhona was starting, bless his soul, as Lukhona was starting, spoke about solutions, right? And if that's our convergence point, it should not matter at what level of the society you are, how you are organized. It should be about what are we trying to solve for. And fortunately, how particularly through the democracy builder we've been able to do has been about not us telling, in the case where, you know, if we were to run a democracy builder with intellectuals, we'll not be telling them what to expect from them, but to hear from them how it is that you want to use, you know, the production of knowledge to be part of improving democracy, enhancing democracy. And in that expression, we then find a way where we intersect how we do our work and what they have expressed. And as you said, you know, find ways of creating projects that are, one, practical, two, tangible, but also find a way of how do we then sustain them. And that's how I see a lot of, or at least in my imagination, how we then are going to be able to activate a number of people that are in different spaces, not just in civil society, even professionals in government. And I think that's the one thing that we need to be obsessing about. We talk a lot about professionalizing the civil service, right? And my question has, or at least in my head, has been, we need to reach out to professionals in the public service in particular, right? There are those who are doing good work, they're always doing it, doing it diligently with integrity. How do we encourage them to do a lot more of that? What is the kind of thing that is going to re-energize them? I've shared this with you that I believe that, small businesses are always left behind. We have this common refrain that small business, they always keep the economies going. But when you look at the conversations as they happen, small business owners are told what they are going to get, what is going to accrue to them, instead of being reached out to, engaged, and for them to, proactively share in how they want the policies to work for them, how they want a number of instruments to work for them. So that's definitely what we should be geared to do. And of course, thankfully, we've created the space. And I guess as we start showcasing, and I think that's the other thing as well, that the more we showcase and people see practically how they can then connect and reach out to the Rivonia Circle, it's going to be easier for them to say, yes, it makes sense. And this is how we want to be able to engage.
Right. I've left the hard questions for last, and I'm going to put it to Lukhona first, because but you addressed this a few weeks ago in your article. But there's a comment here that says, it's great the kind of work that we're doing, the kind of conversations that takes us to thinking about South Africa beyond this current setup. South Africa 2.0, a better future. So there's a question we get asked at the Rivonia Circle often, ad nauseum. Are you contesting 2024? So I dropped the gauntlet. Ox, I'm letting you answer this question.
It's the easiest question to answer in actual fact. Not difficult at all. I think we're not contesting 2024. The Rivonia Circle, at least in our formulation, but because life is not permanent, we don't know what future directors of the Rivonia Circle may wish to do, but we are not. The Rivonia Circle is not going to contest 2024 for the simple reason. When we talk about a space to organize communities of people to be engaged in political conversations, you can't deprive the country of that through selfish interests that people have found resonance with what the Rivonia Circle is doing. Some people are pushing for the Rivonia Circle to politically participate in 2024, and then out of excitement, you make decisions on the fly. You have to have a degree of consistency and principle in how you approach the work. And our consistency and principle is that the Rivonia Circle must continue to exist. The Rivonia Circle must strike partnerships with other, organizations across the world that are engaged in the kind of work that we are doing, and we probably will in the very near future announce a potential partner that is doing that kind of work across the world as we are. We are introducing something new in the South African political, landscape, balance, and all of this thing, and we are committed to do that. Do we believe that there is a missing link in the political landscape? Yes, we do, because the evidence is not us. The evidence is what people tell us in the work that we do. People are quite convinced that there's a missing link in the political landscape. They do feel that there isn't a viable political alternative, which is why when they are unhappy with party X or party Y, they would rather stay at home than go out to vote out of desperation and vote for anyone else. Where will the answer for that political alternative come from? It will come from society. Will it partly come from the Rivonia Circle? If people engage the insights that we have for them, we are more than happy to share those insights, and they be part of that solution. I do think that the Rivonia Circle, intentionally or unintentionally, will be a catalyst for people to think differently about how they politically organize, how they politically mobilize, and I think we are happy to be at the center of catalyzing that, and being at the center of being the holding space for people who want to have those conversations and those forms of action, but leave the Rivonia Circle uncontaminated by the disease of contesting elections. Because unfortunately, once you contest elections, you introduce both a force of attraction and a force of alienation, and you must contend with the results of that. And I think we would want the Rivonia Circle to continue being a space that South Africans from all walks of life can use and utilize to explore their political ideas, their political agency, and their patriotism for the country.
Yeah, I mean, I asked the question in the context of thinking beyond, because we've often spoken about preparing South Africa for a different future, and that 2024 is going to be this moment, this catalytic moment. And so part of new politics is civics, part of it is the community action, we've spoken about it, but part of it is electoral politics, and I think we haven't shied away from that being part of the solution. So maybe as a parting shot to both of you, what role do you think the Rivonia Circle can and should play in catalyzing a different kind of politics in terms of electoral outcomes? Electoral, the electoral system, electoral politics, and 2024. What's our role towards 2024? So, Lorato, I'll start with you, and then you can wrap us out.
Sure. So Tess, importantly, the Rivonia Circle should always be a strategic center of influence, right? Both at importantly at a policy level, but most importantly at community action and community mobilizing, right? And one of the things that, at least the part of the observations of the civil society reflections have been that there's been a lot of internal focus. There's also been a lot of shying away from call it being active in politics, in electoral politics in particular, right? So if the Rivonia Circle can be part of, the word Lukhona used, being catalytic in getting, or at least, ensuring that there is a sense of intent to participate in electoral politics, but we are part of those conversations, ensuring that, we bring in those that ordinarily would not have been in the space before. Look at how do we help everyone who is worried about the crisis that South Africa is sliding into, but say, surely it can't just be good enough for you to be doing community work. You have a role here, and we become that strategic center of influence, in the sense, convene the people, convene these groups, convene these communities, activate these communities, and ensure that the conversations are ongoing. And I think if we can achieve that, that will be a great way of mobilizing and animating people to this political alternative they imagine and as they want to fashion and put it together.
I mean, Songezo Zibi, the director, has really been putting out a call to young professionals and to black professionals and saying, you know, we can't just sit on the sidelines, raise your hand. And so I think part of our role in society is not only encouraging people to raise their hand, but supporting those who want to raise their hands in terms of electoral politics in the same way we're willing to support in terms of community action. Lukhona, our role in creating a different kind of electoral politics towards 2024 and beyond.
There are a number of ways I think we will be instrumental towards 2024, and I think the first one is to continuously emphasizing the point that for democracy to thrive at any point, there are people who must be willing to be self-sacrificial. So we sacrificed our own careers in different paths of life to come together and make sure that the Rivonia Circle works, is institutionalized. You do the fundraising work and mobilization that is necessary to resource it. And I think one of the biggest calls to South Africans of all walks of life who have extreme capacity to run institutions and govern, who have talents in terms of holding communities together, South Africans who have a track record and credibility of high ethical conduct in society must sacrifice themselves for the better good of the country by raising their hands to become public representatives. We do have a crisis of the quality of public representatives in South Africa, and this is across the board. I mean, last week, Salga was saying that in KZN, out of 1,970 or so councillors, 300 of them have asked Salga to teach them how to read and write, not to functionally, but to teach them how to read and write. Now, in a democracy, everybody should be able to contest for elections, but to the extent that you have such a number of people in just one province who are now public representatives, tasked with running very complex institutions and hold executives who are professionalized and specialized accountable. You are unable to do that if you're not literate and if you are not functionally literate. And that shows you the failure of our education system, that we still have the possibility of electing into office people who can't read and write. So we've got a serious problem. So we've got a quality of public representatives, and sometimes the quality problem is opened up because people like myself feel we've got better things to do. We can make money elsewhere. There's not enough money in being a parliamentarian. Absolutely, I can live anywhere in the world, and that's partly because I've had the opportunity to invest in myself, and that's not an opportunity other people have. But what is my role with all the things I have to help our country and to contribute to the life of our country? I think the first one is really motivating people to be, and it can be 5 years, giving up 5 years of your career to go to parliament, because we also want parliamentarians and politicians who actually can do something outside of politics, who can go back to a career, who can go back to a job. President Ahmadinejad in Iran, after his term of office, opened a school because he's actually a professor of science. That's the quality that you need. The second one, I think, is mobilizing communities to define what their electoral priorities are, so that I think one of the biggest things we would be happy to be part of is to change the conversation between voters and politicians by 2024. Whereas politicians traditionally come to communities and make promises, we want communities that actually tell the politician to sit down and make demands, because the priorities, the communities have had enough spaces, have enough platforms through the Rivonia Circle and others to define what their demands are. What, as part of the declaration of the Defend Our Democracy conference, was that there must be some people's manifesto that changes the power dynamics, that at a time of voting, the voter is the most strategically important person rather than the politician, because the voter is meant to give a mandate to the politician. I think that would be the second one. The third one that we will do is, as we are defining what a new political culture is, any new formation that does not fit that scope is nothing but a same and similar typical political party and deserves no attention from citizens. So I think these are the three major ways in which we will contribute to 2024, and it's really fascinating because you begin to locate power back to people. And so I would say, you know, the Rivonia Circle is almost a vehicle that wants to expropriate some power from the politicians and transfer it back to the citizens.
Well, we have come to the end of an hour. It's been good. It's been conversations that we've had in private that we now get to give an insight to the world to. But the role of all of us in the society is to make it better. This morning I was having a conversation with somebody about active citizenry, and I made the point that active citizenry is nothing more than intent. It's the intention to get up and contribute positively, not only to your own life and to your own goals, but to the goals of the broader society. And that's really what we hope to accomplish through the Rivonia Circle, but to encourage a new politics where every person in the society that cares about it feels empowered, enabled, supported to get up and make a contribution that will change the country and to envision the South Africa that you want, a society that is better, that is different, that is upgraded, and see your role in it. And I hope that we can accomplish that as the Rivonia Circle, but that we continue to have conversations on Full Circle every few weeks that inspire you and give you the ability to do that in your own space. Until we see each other again next time, thank you for joining us on Full Circle.